Gen X men feel invisible after 50. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way they would ever say out loud. It is more like a slow dimming. The room gets quieter. The phone rings less. At work, someone younger is already being groomed for the next big thing. At home, everyone has what they need, and nobody particularly needs them. And they handle it the way Gen X handles everything. They get on with it, but something is happening underneath that silence that is worth understanding. Generation X, born roughly between 1965 and 1980, is now squarely in its 50s. The oldest members are nudging 65. They are, depending on who you ask, somewhere between peak competence and the beginning of being pushed aside. And the particular way they are experiencing this period is shaped by something no other generation has faced in quite the same configuration. Research published by Pew Center estimates that nearly a quarter of American adults now belong to what researchers call the sandwich generation. But it is Gen X, specifically those in their 40s and 50s, who are most likely to find themselves simultaneously caring for aging parents while still financially supporting adult or near-adult children. More than half of Gen Xers in their 40s have at least one parent aged 65 or older at the same time as a child, still depending on them. Nearly 3 in 4 people in this position describe it as almost a full-time job on top of everything else. 3 in 5 have reduced or stopped contributing to their own retirement savings because of it. So here is a man in his early 50s. He is working. He is probably carrying at least one other family somewhere in each direction. He is competent, self-contained, not the sort to complain. And he has just started to notice that he is being treated, at work, and in public life, as though he is already on his way out. A survey conducted across a large sample of adults found that men typically begin experiencing that sense of cultural invisibility around the age of 64. But for Gen X men specifically, it tends to arrive earlier, partly because the generation was always culturally invisible to begin with. Psychology Today noted in a piece on Gen X midlife that this cohort has been considered the forgotten generation for decades, sandwiched between the far larger and louder baby boomers and millennials. They never had a cultural moment the way those generations did. And now, entering the second half of life, that pattern is simply continuing. The roots of this particular psychology go back further than midlife. Gen X men grew up in an era where identity was built quietly, through doing. The latchkey experience that defined so much of their childhood, coming home to an empty house, making their own decisions, absorbing their own setbacks without anyone to talk it through with, produced a very specific kind of self-concept. You were what you could handle. You were what you could fix. You were what you showed up for. That architecture worked well for decades. Gen X men built careers, built families, built systems of quiet competence that earned them genuine respect. They were not celebrated for it. They did not particularly want to be, but they knew what they were worth. The problem begins when the external scaffolding that confirmed that identity starts to shift. Research published in the context of midlife male psychology describes what happens when men whose identities have been fused with career success and provider roles encounter the loss or even the partial erosion of those roles. One longitudinal study found that men who retire involuntarily experience significant increases in depressive symptoms, particularly when that transition is tied to declining status or economic instability. The question that aging confronts men with is, in the words of one clinical summary, a brutal one: who am I when I am no longer the provider, the protector, or the performer? For Gen X men, this question has an added dimension. They never built their identity around recognition in the first place. They built it around competence. So, losing the visible markers of that competence, being passed over, being managed by someone 20 years younger, being no longer the most useful person in the room, does not just sting professionally. It reaches into something structural, something they never quite examined because they never needed to. And here is where the psychology gets genuinely complicated. The same independence that made Gen X men so capable of navigating their childhood alone, so effective at crisis management, so reliable in high-pressure situations, becomes the very thing that prevents them from responding well to this particular challenge. Research consistently shows that older men tend to have smaller social networks and are significantly less likely to seek emotional support than women. That gap widens in midlife. And for Gen X men, it is not reluctance exactly. It is something older than reluctance. Not asking for things became identity so early, so completely, that they genuinely cannot separate the signal from the noise. They cannot tell the difference between being fine and having just gotten very good at convincing themselves they are fine. Researchers studying male loneliness have described a pattern that fits this profile almost exactly. Men in midlife will emphatically agree that friendships are essential to a good life. The research consistently shows about 95% will say so, yet fewer than 1 in 5 belong to any kind of regular social group. They care deeply about connection. They are simply not equipped to maintain it. Their friendships run on parallel activity rather than direct conversation. They show up at the game, at the job, at the garage, and the relationship lives in the margins of shared experience. When the activity disappears, so does the contact, and nobody declares that the friendship ended. It just stops. Both men assume it is still there, dormant like something in a drawer. The invisibility Gen X men feel after 50 is not one thing, it is several things wearing the same coat. It is cultural, in the sense that a generation already underrepresented in public discourse finds itself even less visible as it ages. It is professional, in the sense that workplaces structured around youth and novelty treat competence and experience as increasingly beside the point. It is physiological, in the sense that testosterone levels decline gradually after 30 and more noticeably after 50, producing changes in energy, mood, and physical confidence that feel to many men like a betrayal of their own body. And it is relational, in the sense that the social infrastructure of their lives, whatever there was of it, has quietly contracted in ways they may not have noticed until one day they look at the week and find it surprisingly thin. What actually helps is not dramatic. The research does not point to reinvention or transformation. It points to specificity and friction reduction. Men in studies who maintain a sense of purpose and visible social connection after 50 are not typically the ones who overhauled their lives. They are the ones who built in small, regular anchors. One consistent person, one routine that takes them out of the house, one activity frictionless enough that they actually keep doing it, whether they feel like it or not. The parallel activity model that Gen X men learned for friendships still works, but it needs to be intentional now in a way it never had to be before. The natural scaffolding is gone. The garage is not bringing anyone together by accident anymore. For the identity piece, the research points to something uncomfortable but important. Men who navigate this period well tend to be the ones who allow their identity to expand rather than contract. Not replacing competence as a foundation, but adding to it. Mentorship works for some, not as a coping mechanism, but as a genuine recalibration toward a different kind of usefulness. Voluntary engagement, practical projects, knowledge passed on without fanfare. These are the activities that lifespan researchers find most predictive of sustained purpose and well-being in men moving through their 50s and into their 60s. The invisibility does not have to be the whole story, but recognizing it clearly, calling it what it is rather than filing it under fine, is where most of the actual work begins. Gen X men were trained early to hold things together without being thanked for it. That training served them well for 30 years. The skill that got them here, the quiet competence, the self-sufficiency, the preference for doing over-declaring, it does not disappear. It just needs somewhere new to land. And the man who can make that particular pivot without drama, without announcement, without waiting for someone to notice, is doing exactly what Gen X men have always done. He is just doing it with his eyes open this time.